Roto Rankers Audio, the Rivalry. Got Kurt Greeley here with myself, Josh Meredith, looking at Week 7. Kurt, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing good. Happy hump day. Glad to be back again.
Absolutely. Looking at another week in the NFL. We're, already almost halfway, which seems weird.
It was weird.
Let's first go ahead and review last week's show. We'll go through our best bets. Kurt, you want to go through yours first, and we'll go if you want to. We'll start with quarterback, and then I'll give mine, then we'll get through the positions that way.
Sounds good. Well, yeah, quarterback, I went Carson Palmer. It was nice to see him get back and get a starting job back, and he was good in the one game he played, so it was nice to see him come back right where he left off. Had a good game, not a great game, but he's easily the best quarterback on that team, and proves it as well as how the receivers do. So the whole offense is just better with him in there, and so he had 21.7 points this week, and I look for another good week versus the Raiders this week.
Yeah, it was nice to see him back. It helped the receivers out a lot, especially Larry Fitzgerald, as we saw, had a big game, and Michael Floyd just getting in the end zone. That was good to see. My quarterback this week, I went back to the well to Kirk Cousins, and while he did not have an excellent game from a real life standpoint, threw a couple picks, one being the pick six in that same game, obviously against Arizona, but he did rack up the yardage that he's come accustomed to doing. But in his limited time, I think RG3 started 2 games this year with Kirk Cousins starting the other 4. But in those 4 games, and it may be about 4.5 games, Kirk Cousins is leading the league in interceptions. So that's a stat that
Wow,
you don't want you don't want to have.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, but yeah, so he did put up the 354 yards, got into the end zone twice. As far as fantasy points, he did put up the 20.2 points for me, so I was happy with that. Who'd you have at
Okay.
running back?
I had Joik Bell. I believe we both did, but he was kind of a obvious choice if you want to call that with Reggie Bush out. Had a good game. Got a touchdown to make it well worth in both PPR and non PPR. Had 17.7 in PPR. He's going to put up average or better numbers while Bush is out. So Riddick's more involved in the passing game. He's going to be the guy that catches the passes. But even Joy caught a couple. So if Bush is out, you got to keep going back to him.
Absolutely, and I do believe that Bush may be returning this week. But watching that game, I did watch it start to finish, and Theo Riddick played the Reggie Bush role quite well, honestly. And if he wouldn't have gotten injured, I believe he re-aggravated that hammy. If he wouldn't have got injured, he may have been poised for even bigger game, and Drake Bell may not have had the late. Um, I guess I don't really want to call it garbage time because it was never really out of hand, but the way their defense was playing, it almost seemed like that. But nonetheless, the points still counted, and we both had the 17.7. I did have Drake Bell there with you. As far as wide receiver, I believe you went with Sammy Watkins. If you want to discuss his game.
Yeah, I did, and I shouldn't have. I was nervous about going with him. I never should have trusted him on Rivas Island, and I paid for it. I just thought that at least the targets might be there, and then he might break one or at least get some receptions for some PPR points. But he only had 3 targets the entire game. They were just avoiding him altogether. So yeah, just swing and a miss on that one.
Yeah, I actually hit a home run with my wide receiver this week. I haven't had a whole lot of those in the early going this year, but Mohamed Sanu, I almost thought it was kind of one of those slam dunk picks. You have AJ Green out. Obviously, Marvin Jones wasn't able to make it back from his injury, and so Andy Dalton didn't have a whole lot of options. Mohamed Sanu was really the only option there, and he put up 28 PPR points for me, and I'm really satisfied with that.
Nice. Yeah, I went as far as tight end this week. I went with Jared Cook. He had an all right game. 4 receptions for 74 yards. PPR 11.4, which is a pretty good game for not automatic tight end guy. He did have 11 targets, which led the team. The next closest was actually six, Kenny Britt. So see if that continues in the following weeks. Maybe Jared Cook becomes, maybe a every week starter at tight end.
Absolutely, I did like that. I went a little deeper. I went with Tim Wright, and he only had one catch for 1 yard, but that 1 yard went for a touchdown. So I guess I can't be too upset with that. 7.1 PPR points. Anytime you get a receiver into the end zone, you can't really complain too much. I would have liked to have seen him be more involved. He only had that one target. Um, I don't want to try to say the guy's name, but M. Huamana Wanaui or whatever his name is,
Yeah.
the other tight end they have, he had a target again. He had 15 yards receiving. They just seem to be using both, and I really thought that Tim Wright was going to be a little more involved, but I'm not going to complain. On the week, I put up 73 points. I think calculated yours is 55.5. Not a
Yep.
terrible week, but I think I was very pleased with mine. Kind of solid across the board there. So, but let's go ahead and get into this week's games. Starting off with tomorrow night's Thursday night game, we have the New York Jets at New England Patriots. What do you see in this game?
Well, we'll start with the Jets, and well, first of all, let's just hope for a good Thursday night game. We probably won't get one, but uh, the Jets. I was really surprised last week. I mean, they were in it till the end versus the Broncos. Arguably the best team in the NFL. They really had a chance in the fourth quarter, but the running game was still terrible. I don't know. Chris Ivory, I kind of talked about him a little bit last week, but I expected them to at least. I don't know. The Broncos aren't really a good run defense necessarily, uh, and I expected at least Chris Ivory to have a good game, and they just didn't have a good running game altogether. Um, Decker had a good game. It was nice to see him come back and be able to play, be healthy. 6 receptions, 54 yards, and did add a touchdown. So, you got to monitor him with that hamstring. But when he's out there, he's going to be good. The problem in this game is that, just like I touched on a little bit ago, he is going to be the one that draws Revis Island this week. So maybe lower your expectations from him this week. But another guy to point out is Jason Morrow, the tight end for the New York Jets. Had 10 receptions for 68 yards and actually had 12 targets. So, maybe it was just the way the defense was running last week, but that's something you got to pay attention to and monitor the next couple weeks. And especially if Decker's on Revis Island this week, maybe they go back to Jason Morrow this week. So then as far as the Patriots, I hope we're not eating our words here on Tom Brady. We've kind of bashed him at the beginning of the season, but boy, he's looked good the last couple weeks and versus some pretty good defenses actually. So we'll see if this is the real deal or if he just had a couple good weeks. This will be another good test versus the Jets. Big story on the Patriots is Ridley out for the year. A lot of waiver claims as far as probably Bolden and James White this week. It'll be interesting to see who steps in. I see Vereen's role increasing overall, and then Bolden got the carries when Ridley went out last week, but didn't really do a whole lot with him. He got 6 carries for 10 yards, so it wasn't like anybody was getting James White get his first crack. He's had a couple carries so far, but nothing too extensive. So maybe see him, the Patriots' fourth-round draft pick, get a chance this week. And last thing, it was nice to see Brady and Edelman get back on the same page. Edelman led the team in targets again and had 9 receptions for 91 yards. So that was good to see.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add to that. I'm pretty much in agreement on all of it. I will. I'll echo the Revis Island. I think Decker does get shut down for the most part, and I think that does open up Jason Morrow as their number 2 receiver. Going from Revis Island from week 7 to Revis Island week 6 against Buffalo, you kind of mentioned. I've got the Buffalo, Minnesota at Buffalo game. And we'll start with Buffalo here. You just mentioned it. Sammy Watkins was just shut down, basically taken out of the game. Only had the 2 catches for 27 yards on the 3 targets. They continually threw away from him. Robert Woods led the team in targets with 10, had 7 catches for 78 yards with the touchdown. And that was actually nice to see because, I actually like Robert Woods' talent. Even Chris Hogan had 6 targets, got into the end zone, and Scott Chandler had a big game. The 9 targets had 6 catches, 105 yards. Look for Watkins to get back involved in the offense against Minnesota this week. He'll be targeted a lot more, and the Vikings don't have anybody of Revis's caliber, so no need to worry about that. Mike Williams, though, in that receiving core, making waves this week, requesting a trade.
Yeah.
All right, good luck, I suppose. Nobody wants that or your contract, so I suppose. And I actually really like GM coming out and saying go for it because he knows that there is no value, so he doesn't want to show that he doesn't want to do it himself because he knows he's not going to get anything out there. So, uh, but as far as the running game for Buffalo, Fred Jackson obviously continues to be the lead back. He did only have the 10 carries, but Anthony Dixon came in second above CJ Spiller with 7. Dixon had 7 carries, Spiller only the 6, and Spiller didn't have any catches either. Fred Jackson did have the 4 catches, 17 yards. At this point, I think we can consider Spiller's short-term fantasy value as very limited. If they're not going to use him, I think he only had 12 snaps last week. If they're not going to use him, he's not going to play. There's just not a whole lot of value there. I still think he has some long-term value. Contract's up at the end of the year, and we'll see where he goes. But as far as Buffalo, he's going to be more involved than he was last week, but they don't trust him in pass coverage. And so I just obviously Fred Jackson's the guy to have. That's all there really is to it in that running game. As far as the Vikings are concerned, it was awesome to see Jerick McKinnon finally get the start. He outtouched Matt Asiata 17-3. I think McKinnon has moved into an RB3 or flex running back option moving forward. He does have the upside of an RB2 in good matchups. This is not one of them, but
Yeah.
good to see the catches, though. I think he had 6 catches last week, showing good hands, and that's great for PPR. I don't see that 17-3 touch ratio of the running backs continuing. Mike Zimmer, head coach, came out and said this week that they do want to get Asiata more involved, and it was just a bad matchup, which for a power back against Detroit's defensive line, you can't use him, and so that's what they did is basically didn't. So I do see Asiata getting more carries than he had, but McKinnon's still the guy that I would much rather have. Buffalo is good against the run, as we said, but you can pass against them. However, because of that offensive line for Minnesota, I just can't suggest anyone be started in that passing game until we see some things worked out. I keep predicting that Cordero Patterson's going to get involved. They talk about it every week, how they need to, but Teddy Bridgewater has no time back there, and Patterson just doesn't seem to be getting open. They aren't force-feeding him like I thought they might at one time. So at this point, it's a sit your Minnesota, basically all your Minnesota players, unless you really need them, and then hope that they do something on your bench to gain some trust to be able to put them in there.
Yeah, I was just gonna maybe definitely on McKinnon. This isn't the good week like you were just talking about, but it's obvious that the changing of the guard is coming there, and he's the guy to take over. Maybe a really good buy low candidate after this week if you can convince someone that if he maybe has a bad game here versus Buffalo, who's a good run defense. If you can maybe convince someone, McKinnon's not he's not doing what everybody thought he was, and you could buy low. I think the future is bright for him.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've been on this for. I've been trying to bang that drum for a while that McKinnon is the guy.
Yeah.
So hopefully you've either picked him up or, like you said, maybe have a chance to buy low on him. But don't give up on him after this week. And he may get some garbage PPR catches. So that'll be good to keep his value up even this week possibly.
Yeah.
Next game, let's go ahead and touch on. Kurt, why don't you touch on Miami at Chicago?
Yeah, we'll start with the Dolphins. It's too bad Marshall's not with us tonight because I was actually subjected to watching this entire game between the Dolphins and the Packers last week in a Packer bar.
Ooh.
So that was I was in Marshall's dreamland, but I heard "Go Pack Go." It's still ringing in my ears actually. But uh, big news from the Dolphins is no Sean Moreno out for the season. Um, I think we were all kind of surprised about it. See, at least I was when the news came out because um, there wasn't like he left the game on a stretch until after the game. And so I went back and I did a little research and I found an article or at least a report that he actually stayed in the game for another play after he tore his ACL, which I didn't realize. And so that's why nobody really made a big deal about it, which is just nuts. But anyway, regardless, Lamar Miller, the guy that's going to take over, huge bump for him. He's most likely almost guaranteed owned in all leagues at this point, but expect a big bump from him. Uh, the Dolphins' offense overall looked really bad in the first half, and then, like I said, I was watching this whole game, and in the second half, they actually started doing some read option with Tannehill, and that's when they started driving the ball on the Packers. So, I don't know. Maybe look for some read option here. Maybe that's something they just are planning on doing some more. Maybe Tannehill gets some rushing numbers in the upcoming weeks. I don't know. He had to get like 40 yards or so this past week, but it was kind of interesting to see. And then as far as the receivers, Tannehill actually looked Jarvis Landry's way a lot. He had 8 targets. He had a really good game, 6 receptions, 75 yards, and a touchdown, and second only in targets to Mike Wallace. And Brian Hartline didn't even record a catch. So, maybe Jarvis Landry stepping into the number 2 role as far as receivers on that team. And then on the Chicago side of things, Cutler continues to be an absolute steal for where you most likely drafted him. Depending on how many points you do for a touchdown, he's probably in your top 3 to 6 range at this point in the season. And finally, we see Matt Forte perform the last couple of weeks to the point of where we drafted him. The first couple of weeks, I think people were kind of nervous, but he's been a stud the last couple of weeks and just a killer in PPR. I think he's had double-digit receptions the last 2 weeks as a running back, which is just incredible. So Martellus Bennett had a pretty quiet game out of the receivers, but Jeffrey and Brandon Marshall both had big games, and so when you tack on Forte into that, it's pretty hard to have 4 receivers have good games. So I expect Bennett to bounce.
Yeah, and just to interject here on that Forte news, I believe I heard a stat that if you took out his rushing and only took his PPR receiving info, and I believe he would be a wide receiver 2. I think he's about the 16th best wide receiver if you took out all of his rushing stats.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah. And you're right. 12 catches against Carolina, 10 catches against Atlanta. That's 22 catches for 182 yards the last 2 weeks and a touchdown.
Just nuts.
That is that's wide receiver numbers that are that's wide receiver 1 numbers, and that's not counting his rushing. So yeah, you're 100% correct there. One thing I wanted to mention on that Miami and Green Bay game, you talked about the read option being used. You wonder if it is something they're going to try to do a little more of, or they found a weakness in Green Bay's defense. We've seen that in the past. Green Bay's had a lot of trouble with the read option. San Francisco in the playoffs just killed them with it. And you wonder if it was a game plan for just them, or if they are going to use it moving forward. But
Yeah.
you're right. Tannehill did look good with it, and we'll see against Chicago if they run a little bit of that. And that's a very underrated fantasy line for quarterbacks, is those few extra rushing yards that they can put up. It's underrated and people don't look at it much, but just those, like you said, 40, 50 yards, that's 4 and 5 points that just tack on to the top of the throwing. So
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. It's huge.
but I'm gonna move on to the New Orleans at Detroit game. New Orleans coming off the bye week should be looking to get the ball out quick. Breeze will be looking for more of the 3 to 5 step drop, not as much of the deep 7-step drop. If they watched any of the film of Detroit, the last few weeks, especially against the Vikings, they had the 8 sacks. Teddy Bridgewater just had no time. Without Jimmy Graham, I do see one guy, and it's a little bit of foreshadowing, but I do see one guy having a big game. That's Brandon Cooks. I think that he's the type of guy. I know Detroit's been, I think they're number 2 against the run and number 1 against the pass so far this year. I think they will be able to, at least hold Breeze down. Breeze is historically not a very good road quarterback, or at least in recent memory, he's not as good of a road quarterback. He's kind of a home road split guy. But I think PPR, you want to get Brandon Cooks in there. I think he's going to get a lot of those short passes and get a ton of targets. Josh Hill, the starter at tight end for Jimmy Graham. Not looking at his way much. I mean, he may get a few catches, but I'm not real excited about him. Mark Ingram does come back to the backfield. It's going to be a little bit interesting to see how they split those carries. I think it'll be distributed pretty evenly, maybe easing Ingram back in with Kyrie Robinson and Pierre Thomas, but I do see Ingram getting back to his old role if he is healthy. I did like what I saw in the first 2 games, and I think some of that continues. As far as Detroit, we saw the offense did struggle last week against Minnesota, but without Calvin and Reggie Bush, that's to be expected. I think Reggie Bush is back. Calvin Johnson is out. We talked a little bit about Theo Riddick already. He looked really good, but he may be missing a week or 2 with the hammy. If Calvin is indeed out again, obviously we're going to recommend that you start Golden Tate again. He can still play alongside Calvin, but when Calvin's out, I look for a big game from him again. So especially against that New Orleans defense, not a terribly awesome pass defense. So get your Golden Tate shares out in your starting lineups this week as well. Anything to add in that game, Kurt?
No, not at all. You nailed it.
Awesome. Well, let's move on. We've got Carolina at Green Bay. Why don't you discuss the Panthers and Packers?
Yeah, we'll start with the Panthers. First of all, we had our first tie game last week, so that was interesting. Shouldn't have been because of, I believe it was a 27-yard field goal was missed or something like that. But
yeah, Mike Nugent.
Yeah, that sucks. But that was interesting. But as far as the Panthers, Cam Newton, it was his kind of coming out party as far as showing the world that he is healthy and ready to run, and he did it, and he did it well. He carried the ball 17 times for 107 yards and a touchdown. That is purely his rushing statistics. So, we just talked about Green Bay maybe being susceptible to that read option. He could just go nuts this week. So if Cam Newton's a guy that's been kind of hanging out on your bench because he had a slow start, get him in there this week. I think Greg Olsen continues to be a great value at tight end, kind of the Phillip Rivers of tight ends. He's just dominating and just doing it really quietly, but just has good weeks every single week. Kelvin Benjamin with another good week. He continues to be the most productive rookie wide receiver thus far, and I think he continues it this week. And that run game is still kind of a mess, so don't think you're starting any of the running backs there. But outside of that, some good options. As far as the Packers, boy, like I said, I watched that whole game, and I want them to lose so bad.
We all did.
I know, and I wish Marshall was here tonight. And that final drive, man, he made that touchdown throw in that last play look so easy. It was just stupid. But the thing that people aren't mentioning as far as Aaron Rodgers is that he fumbled halfway through that drive, and one of his offensive linemen recovered it to save the drive. I mean, that it would have been over. All somebody had to do on the defensive line was recover it, and his offensive lineman saved him. He's getting all the credit, but he pretty much should have lost that game. Eddie Lacy is just kind of plodding along. He's had one good game, and I think everybody kind of thought, like, oh, here we go. Like, this is the Eddie Lacy we've been waiting for. And no, that was kind of the outlier of the season was that one good game. Everything else has been pretty poor. And I've read a lot of reports talking about, questioning is is Eddie Lacy this year's Trent Richardson? And I don't know. I'm starting to believe it. He puts up like 2 point whatever yards per carry every week, and unless he gets in the end zone, he's just not really worth it. So, if you got him, you kind of have to start him, but you're kind of hoping for things to turn around. Carolina is not the team that you expect that to happen against. And then lastly, Jordy Nelson with another big game. He is second only to Julio Jones on the year in targets. So I believe he's only one target behind him. He's just hands down Aaron Rodgers' favorite target. And so you expect him, even versus a good Carolina defense, to have another good game. And then I thought a noteworthy receiver was Devontae Adams. He looked really good. Like I said, I watched this game and I hadn't got a chance really to see a lot of Devontae Adams play a lot, catch a lot, and just perform with the ball in his hands. And he looked really good. I thought he had 8 targets, which was second on the team to Jordy Nelson. And he's not a guy that people haven't heard of. He's definitely one of the rookies that has made some waves so far. But boy, he looked good. I think his arrow's pointing up.
Yeah, I think he can fill in pretty nicely for the James Jones role that they lost in the offseason. And I thought the same thing a couple weeks ago, seeing him get some playing time, and he's much more talented than Jared Boykin is. So he's a better insertion to that offense for sure. Sticking with that game, the Carolina game, I'm going to move on to Cincinnati at Indianapolis. Cincinnati, as you mentioned, tied up with Carolina. Mike Nugent missed the short field goal at the end of overtime. Pretty disappointing, just because like they say, tying it's like kissing your sister. So
Right.
it sucks. I wish they had some other way to do it, but
College football, man. It's the best way to do it.
I love it too. Only thing that takes out is it takes out the kickoff and the punting game. So
Right.
the field position game is completely taken away. But I agree with you that is a much better way of doing it anyway. As far as Cincinnati, and Giovanni Bernard had another huge game. He had 18 carries for 137 yards. That's 7.6 yards a carry. Meanwhile, Jeremy Hill, a lot of people do like, and I really liked him coming in. This is a bad situation for him, but they do well together. But anyway, he had 8 carries for 22 yards, only a 2.8 yards per carry. They each did get in the end zone, save their value. It was nice to see Jeremy Hill did have the 4 catches for 13 yards. Giovanni Bernard also had 4 catches. So nice to see. Carolina's actually been a little bit easier to run against than they have in the past. But this week, I think Indianapolis they've looked good offensively. And you mentioned the Thursday night game, hoping it was good. We finally got one last week. The
Yeah,
first
true.
quarter, the Indianapolis was up 24-0, and I could not believe it because we had talked about how many bad games we had, and that one was even worse
Yeah.
because 24-0 first quarter, and it was a 1-possession game at the end, and the
Yeah.
Texans had a chance. So that was pretty cool to finally see a game actually care about watching it to the end. But in Cincinnati's past game, I don't want to touch too much on. We discussed Sanu. He's going to have a ton of targets again. So not much to mention there. Indianapolis last Thursday, if you watched that or saw the box score afterwards, you saw that T.Y. Hilton went crazy in that game. He had caught all 9 of his targets for 223 yards and a touchdown. That he just they didn't stick with him. He had Andrew Luck just looked at him every time they needed him, and he came up with a big play every time. And he is, you think of the wide receivers that have gone through Indianapolis. Marvin Harrison with Peyton Manning, then Reggie Wayne takes over with Peyton Manning, and then into Andrew Luck, and kind of looks like T.Y. Hilton's the next in that line of very consistent, a little bit undersized, but really efficient wide receivers. And he does it with speed, obviously not with any of his height or weight, but really like him. In PPR leagues, he's just getting fed the ball. So we mentioned him a little bit last week. Reggie Wayne's still going to get a lot of catches. Hakeem Nicks is nowhere to be found. He did have this, 7 targets, but only the 2 catches. He just doesn't look right out there. I mean, he looks healthy. He just doesn't look like he and Andrew Luck are on the same page. I actually kind of liked that spot for him coming into the year. I thought he may have a little bit of resurgence, but I just and then you hear about him, being unhappy with his role and this and that, and it's like he's a free agent after the year, similar to Mike Williams. I don't understand what these guys think is going to happen when you do this, especially publicly and whatnot. I mean, you're not going to help your value. Shut up, play, try to rehab your value next year because it's obvious that you're not a big part of that offense and you're not going to be. Look for Dante Moncrief to fill in that role next year anyway. So I wish that Bradshaw didn't have his injury history that he does have. We do talk about him every week, but if he didn't have that, he just runs so well. I like the way he runs. He runs hard. And if he didn't have those neck injuries in the past and some of the injuries he's had, I think that he could be the every down back. And I don't think Trent Richardson would be near a part of that offense. But I think that they're going to continue to feed Trent Richardson in all short yardage and garbage time and things like that because he has the health and they want to keep Bradshaw for the stretch run and into the playoffs. So they have no reason to shy away from giving Richardson the ball. So I just don't see Bradshaw getting a full dose of carries at all this year. With this week, just to mention, it was 17 carries for Richardson and 11 for Bradshaw. So that's all I've got on that game. I don't know if you got anything to add.
Well, I just wanted to let our small batch of 20, 25 listeners, whoever, whatever, that Josh and I actually played each other in fantasy this week, and T.Y. Hilton was on Josh's team, so that was a great start to my week
and,
when
and you had a receiver in that game as well.
Oh, I did. His name was DeAndre Hopkins. I don't know if he showed up on the stat sheet anywhere, but yeah. So
Thursday night, it started out with I got at a 35-point lead, which I wasn't complaining about.
oh my
Little did we know
gosh.
that your entire team was gonna just sit out, and we didn't have to worry about it. I could have sat T.Y. Hilton all together and still won because your team just
Yeah,
didn't show up for some reason. It was just one of those weeks where you just everybody kind of shits the bed at once. So
yeah. As
it's not
long as they
much you
do it
can
in
do.
1 week, then they can
Yeah,
do it all the other weeks. Yeah.
get back to the consistency moving forward.
Right.
Let's get to your favorite Titans. They're playing at Washington this week.
Hey, my Titans won a game. We beat the Jaguars on a blocked last second field goal.
They were
That's
it was
that's
about
what
to
it
be the worst 2 weeks of
that's
Titan
that
fandom ever if they would have came back and lost that. But
it oh my gosh. That's just being a Titans fan now.
the
You just
the
gotta
Titans
roll with
were
the punches.
the Titans were my streaming defense everywhere. So they actually had a good week, and then I saw at the end that block. I was pumped.
Yeah, so, well, first of all, if you're the Jaguars, I'm pretty sure they kicked it with 12 seconds left, and I can't remember if they had a timeout or not. Even if they didn't, 12 seconds, 55-yarder, like you have plenty of time, especially if you have a timeout, to run another play and get a little bit closer, but whatever, I'm not complaining.
Right.
Um, anyway, back to the Titans. It's just obvious they need Locker out there, as weird as that is to say, because has had a bad start to the season. He just hasn't even looked that great even when he's out there. But he's better than Whitehurst, and they haven't given Mettenberger a shot yet, which I honestly think they should over Whitehurst. But it sounds like Locker might be back out there this week. Um, Bishop Sankey finally gets the touches that everybody's kind of been waiting for. He got 18 carries this week. He didn't do a whole lot with them. He got 61 yards, which isn't bad. It's about 3.5 yards a carry. But he's just not going to get those catches that would make him valuable in a PPR. I think he might have had one or two, but McCluster was the receiving back this week and will be just about every week. He's that playmaker that they can put back there on third downs and yards this week. Both of those two guys saw a lot of work because Sean Green was out this week, and haven't read any reports as to whether he'll be back this week. But yeah, you can kind of expect a similar dose this week if Green is out. That Sankey's probably going to get the most touches, but McCluster is going to get that third down and passing down work. So, but it was nice to see Sankey at least get some touches, show that he can be an every down, or not every down, but first couple down type guy. As far as the Redskins, uh, yeah, Cousins, he put up a good, you talked about this. He put up a good week fantasy wise, but oh my gosh, did he look bad, like NFL wise? I only caught some of that game, but every time I was watching, he just looked bad. I caught the end of that game where he threw that last interception, and I just looked at the people around me and I was like, who was he throwing that to? I honestly don't know. Like the camera didn't even show any other person other than an Arizona linebacker catching the ball in wide open field and running in for a touchdown. So I don't know who he was throwing to, but it was not close, whoever it was. But yeah, he continues to be a good quarterback fantasy wise at least. And like you said, he's throwing those interceptions, but he's been better than RG3. So uh, Deshaun Jackson with another big game, but now he's had like a 40, 50 plus yard touchdown. So he's a little big play dependent, but he's like the Anton Smith of receivers right now. He's like, you put the ball in his hands and he's going to get there. So if you have him, you're starting him, and you look for those plays. That's who Deshaun Jackson is. So outside of Deshaun Jackson, welcome back Jordan Reed. 8 receptions, 92 yards on 11 targets. It was really nice to see him get involved. He's just such a talent there. It's been unfortunate the injuries that he's battled with. So, but when he's healthy, he's going to be. If you have him, you're starting him. He's such a talent, and it's good that they get him involved. Lastly, Pierre Garcon. I still don't understand how he's just now at least getting targets. He had a touchdown, which kind of saved the day for his owners. I am one of them in a different league, not Josh and I's league, but he led the league at one point, and I'm not sure at the end of the season, but at one point he led the league last year in targets, and he's just not seeing them this year, and I just don't know why. Yeah, he's a physical receiver that deserves to at least get. Last year he got a lot of those right at the line of scrimmage, just like screens basically, and he's powerful enough to get 7+ yards, and they're just not doing that this year. I don't really get it, but kind of something to watch out for. If you have him, you kind of have to start him. You're a little frustrated, but maybe start to temper your expectations. They're just not going his way.
Mm-hmm. I think a little bit that has to do with Deshaun Jackson. Obviously, they're getting him the ball. He's been the big play threat that you mentioned, and I think they feel that they need to get the ball in his hands. And also, Jordan Reed was out most of last year, and so you bring him back in, and I think that hurts his value because he's that same role that you talk about, the very physical, big. He's a matchup nightmare. And but I do love the mention there on Jordan Reed because I was a huge fan of his coming in. If he can stay healthy, he's a top 5 or 6 tight end probably moving forward. So
For sure.
moving here on to Seattle at St. Louis. Seattle actually got stunned last week. Dallas came into Seattle and stole that one. Russell Wilson and that whole offense basically really struggled, and Dallas has done that a lot this year. They just really controlled the clock and been able to keep the ball out of the other team's hands. I think this week's a bounce back week for Seattle. I really like not only Russell Wilson, but I think this is the week that Percy Harvin gets involved. I think that they try to feed him the ball. He's just hasn't been involved at all, and he had the 3 touchdowns called back 2 weeks ago. I think that I really do think that they get the ball in his hands. PPR wise, I think they give him a lot of short passes to use him, kind of like we talk about with Deshaun Jackson. Get him in the open field, get him in space, and let him do what he does best, and that's basically make people miss, break tackles, score touchdowns. St. Louis did look a lot better against the run last week. Against San Francisco, Carlos Hyde and Frank Gore struggled to get any room. So they may be starting to gel a little bit on that defensive line there for St. Louis. But you're still going to start Marshawn Lynch. Just maybe don't see it as maybe their rank. I think St. Louis is outside the top 20 in rush defense, but they did look a little better last week. As far as the Rams, running back roulette. I mean, Zach Stacy just runs tentatively right now. He's just not running like as hard as he did last year. I just he doesn't look good to me right now. He isn't hitting it. I mean, last year he's a bigger running back, and he was very decisive last year and with his cuts, and I just don't see it. Benny Cunningham, not that he's a really a superior athlete or much more talented, anything like that, but he just looks better in that offense. And um, Trey Mason looked better than either of them. He only had a few carries, but I think at this point it's tough to really get any of them. I mean, I guess Benny Cunningham might be uh, maybe getting a few more carries than the others. I don't know that, but I gotta believe that the St. Louis coaching staff is going to start to give Mason the ball more. If he could pass block, if he didn't have the issues in the passing game, he would be already getting all those touches. So, but at this point, you just got to sit back and figure out, let it all work itself out, because you just can't at this point. You just can't really predict. And I want to get your perspective on that as well, Kurt. I know you're a Zach Stacy and a Trey Mason owner. Um, what are your thoughts there on that backfield?
Yeah, I think up until this point, up until this past week, I think that Cunningham has looked like the better back over Zach Stacy, and I think there was a lot of talk about him taking over, and Stacy kind of held him off a little bit as far as carries, and now Trey Mason's in the picture. So like you said, it's just a mess. It'll be interesting to see what they do. I think the most interesting part is being a Tennessee Titans fan. And Jeff Fisher, with his long tenure there before going to St. Louis, he's always been, I mean, and granted the NFL's changed in general, but he's always been a workhorse back type guy. And so I kind of expected him to go to St. Louis and just lean on Zach Stacy like they did last year. I think that's what everybody thought coming into this year, is Zach Stacy was going to average 18 to 20 carries again this year, and be a volume guy, and they're just not doing that at all. They're spreading it around, and like those where you got to hold on to the guys you have and see how this pans out.
Right. And Cook, I just wanted to mention Jared Cook getting involved last week. That was nice to see. It was at Brian Quick's expense, but I do see Brian Quick getting back involved a little more. He's never really going to be mistaken for a wide receiver one, really even a high number two either. But the volume and the fact that they've got it in the ball gives him at least back end wide receiver 2 into wide receiver 3 territory. I don't see him having as bad of a game as he did last week, but he's still working his way. He's an unpolished receiver, and he's just not going to be a really, really consistent guy every week. And so I do see a little bit of inconsistency compared to what we saw for the first 5 weeks, but I think he'll get it back on track. But let's go ahead and get on to Cleveland Browns at Jacksonville. Kurt, how do you see this one shaking out?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think it'll be a blowout, to be honest. I was thinking back to our episode last week and how we laughed at how the Browns, I think Steelers were only like a 1 point favorite, or maybe even the Browns were favored over the Steelers, and we all thought, like, this is stupid. And then they go and blow them out. So I don't know if the Browns are that good, or the Steelers are that bad, or somewhere in between. But the Browns have been impressive so far. And frankly, they just ran the ball down the Steelers' throat. Hoyer only threw it 17 times the whole game. Ben Tate had a really good game. The touchdowns are what helped him. He had 25 carries for 78 yards, but then added 2 touchdowns on top of that. And then also Isaiah Crowell, less carries but more efficient with him, 11 carries for 77, and also added a touchdown. Crowell, I think a lot of people are talking about being the better back in that backfield, but I just think Tate's there to stay right now. He's their guy, and he's going to get the bulk of carries. And I think it's his job to lose. Cameron was the only receiver with a good day. It's hard to have too many valuable wide receivers when you only throw the ball 17 times. And his day basically came on a 51-yard TD catch. So, I don't know. I could see something similar happen this week. I would definitely be nervous about playing Hoyer or those receivers. They're going to have to score their points early, that's for sure. As far as the Jaguars, they they couldn't even run the ball on the Titans. And I'll tell you right now, the Titans are not a good run defense. They are a decent defense all around, especially fantasy wise, but they have been destroyed in the run this year. And Storm Johnson got his chance and couldn't really do a whole lot with him. He got 10 carries, and I've read reports that
You there?
he
All right, go ahead.
uh, Storm Johnson was on a snap count this week, and I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm not really sure what exactly that means. I don't know what it means this week with Gerhardt, but we'll see how things shake out there. Regardless, running game couldn't get going there at all. Uh, Cecil Shorts did have a good game. 10 receptions, 103 yards, 16 targets. I've said in past weeks, in my opinion, he's the only receiver on that team that's startable, at least on a weekly basis. Allen Robinson did have a decent game. He's a guy to keep an eye out. He's probably owned in most leagues. If he's not, it's worth picking up. And if he is on your team, keep an eye. He had a decent week, but definitely watch him the next couple weeks. He could be increasing.
Awesome. Atlanta at Baltimore. Atlanta's offensive line problems continue to hurt the passing game. The receivers also did not help. Matt Ryan out last week, had a ton of drops. It's not a great matchup, and so you're starting your guys you have on there. I'm not starting any running back for Atlanta, but obviously you're starting your Julio Jones, Matt Ryan, and probably going to start Roddy if you need him there. Can we free Anton Smith yet? Please,
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 please.
just give him a chance. I do not. I mean, we actually we talk about it every weekend, and when we talk about games, it's always we continue to ask each other and everybody I talk with is like, why does this guy not get more playing time? I mean, part of it I got to give Atlanta credit for. They're picking and obviously picking the right spots to get him the ball at, but if it's happening so often that you got to try to open it up even more and give him the ball, whether if he has to be in space, that's fine. I mean, he's obviously a freak athlete, and they got to try to give him more touches. As far as Baltimore though, what a first half by Flacco and those receivers. I mean, 5 touchdowns in basically the first a little over the first quarter. I mean,
Unreal.
there were still 13 minutes in the second quarter when he had 5 touchdowns. I mean, that is
Yeah,
unreal.
that's crazy.
You're going to start every one of your Ravens that you normally would this week and be happy about it. That Atlanta defense is awful. Flacco's, definitely startable again. You're going to start Steve Smith and Torrey Smith if you're me. And Forset's definitely startable. He's kind of worked his way into the best running back in that backfield. I don't want to start the others, even though they did, they continue to get touches, but they're not as efficient as Justin Forset's been. So he's the only one I'm really looking at starting. Kansas City at San Diego. What do you think on that one?
Yeah, Chiefs are coming off a bye. So not a whole lot to talk about there. I expect a big game from Jamal Charles and possibly Nile Davis, as we've seen the past couple weeks. They could kind of support both. Not really too interested in their receivers, except outside of Travis Kelce, which we talked about multiple weeks. As the Chargers go, Phillip Rivers, what do you say? He continues to dominate. And then Brandon Oliver proves that he can be an every down back, even slightly undersized. 26 carries for 101 yards and a touchdown. Also added 4 catches. It'll be interesting to see what happens when the other backs get back to healthy, especially Matthews. I think he's kind of proved that he deserves to be above Donald Brown, at least on the depth chart. He's not practicing yet, so probably expect another week of high dose of Brandon Oliver. If you have him, you're starting him. I expect another huge week out of him. Malcolm Floyd was the best of the wide receivers, of all receivers, I should say. That guy that not a big name, but he's going to be there, and he scores a touchdown, so he has a pretty decent week. So he's a guy that's definitely rosterable. You're going to have to play some matchups and see if maybe this is really the real deal. But Keenan Allen continues to disappoint. I think he's one of the biggest disappointments really on the season. It's weird. He's getting the targets, but they're just not converting them into anything, and definitely not touchdowns. He had a lot of touchdowns last year, not getting them this year. And then lastly, Ladarius Green and Antonio Gates kind of splitting the reps at tight end. As far as snap count goes, had a similar 50-50 split the week before. So I don't know if we're seeing what's going to happen the rest of the year, if we're starting to see something that's Darius Green, but something to keep an eye on if you're an owner of either.
Right on. I'm in agreement there. New York Giants at Dallas. Tough break for the Giants with the Victor Cruz torn patella tendon in the right knee, done for the season. It's going to be a big boost for your Ruben Randall fans and owners. Also, Odell Beckham Jr. is going to get obviously a boost there. Last week it was Eli and that whole offense was really disappointing. I don't know if they're who we originally thought they were from the preseason, or if they are what they were a couple weeks ago when they were putting up a ton of points. I'm guessing that they're somewhere in between. Andre Williams, really disappointing start for him. We talked about liking him just because of he's going to dominate the touches, but he just wasn't able to do anything with those. After this week, I believe the Giants go on a bye week, and then Rashad Jennings comes back. Maybe they don't even have a bye week. But regardless, Rashad Jennings obviously is going to take that job back here soon. I don't even see a good game by Williams this week either. So, and Eli Manning is also going to be the one that's hurt by that Cruz injury. I should mention. So that's tough break for them. As far as Dallas, they just it's another week and another conversation that we're going to have about how good DeMarco Murray is, but also how overused he's been. I mean, he's getting so many carries. At some point, we talk about it every week, and obviously the Dallas brass don't listen to our podcast, but at some point they need to start lowering his carries. He just can't. No running back can sustain this. I mean, we talked about it. The highest carries ever is Larry Johnson. We saw how fast he fizzled out. DeMarco Murray's on pace to break that. So hopefully they start to lessen his load. But if you're in a redraft league, you're loving it because you don't really care what happens long term. Good matchup for the offense. I actually kind of like Terrence Williams this week. I think he could have a sneaky good week, along with obviously Romo, Dez, and Witten might have a few catches again as well. But all good, all is well in Dallas, and full on go ahead with the guys you normally start there. Arizona at Oakland. Curtis.
Yeah, we already kind of touched on Palmer and just how much better that whole offense is with him in there. Talk about Ellington real quick. He's Andre Ellington not doing too great as far as carries go, but he's getting really involved in the pass game, which is no surprise. I think that's kind of what everybody was hoping for him this season. This past week, he had 6 catches on 9 targets actually, which is really nice to see. If you're in a PPR league, he's been at least consistent. He hasn't had those breakout games like those breakout runs to do bigger workload, but he's still been very serviceable, and he's avoiding injury, which he kind of had that injury scare to start the season, but he's been able to play every week, which is nice. On the Raiders side of the ball, they looked pretty good last week. I mean, they almost beat the Chargers, who are arguably a top 3 team right now. Carr looked really good. Not really good, I should say, but better than anybody they've had in recent memory.
Hey, 4 touchdowns. You're not going to scoff at that if you're an Oakland Raider fan.
Right, exactly. So yeah, 4 touchdowns. So I mean, we'll see if that's the real thing there. Arizona's a good defense to prove it against. So we'll see what happens this week. He's definitely another guy that's rosterable, or at least a guy to keep an eye on, depending on the depth of your league. McFadden actually had a pretty good day. Let's not get carried away. He's still Darren McFadden, but
Right.
something. Andre Holmes, a guy that was probably a big waiver wire guy this week. He's getting the playing time with Rod Streeter out, and he's proving that he's deserved it all along. He's kind of that physical specimen that kind of has like a Randy Moss look to him. he's just made the most of his catches and his playing time and proving that he deserves it. So if he wasn't claimed on your waiver wires, pick him up, and if he is, Arizona might not be the greatest team to start him against, but he's proved that he can make the most of his touches, and definitely a guy that's worth looking at over the next couple weeks.
Absolutely. San Francisco at Denver. San Francisco last week, I talked about their struggles a little bit in the running game. I'm looking like Hyde might be starting to take over a little more of the carries. Not that he didn't run well at all, actually, neither him or Gore did. But the telling thing for me, as a Gore owner in a couple different leagues, I actually sold off on him this week for what I could get out of him because when they were trying to bleed out the clock late in the game, I mean, Hyde was on. He had the goal line carries, and then he came out for the next drive as well, and was the running back they had back there. I don't know if that means they trust him or if there was maybe something going on with Gore at the time, but that was kind of a tell for me that maybe it's starting to turn over to Hyde. I think it's going to be maybe closer to a 50-50 timeshare moving forward, and so now's the time I think to get out from under Gore. Based on his pretty decent performances over the last few weeks. I'm just at the point where I considered him a good buy low, knowing that he's going to eventually be fizzled out. But at this point, I'm starting to kind of see that now is probably the time to start to sell off. I don't think that he's going to be taken out of the offense. He's going to continue to get his share, but maybe Hyde is going to start to get a little more as well. Kaepernick threw the ball everywhere last week in St. Louis. He's going to need to do so again. They're not going to be able to pound the rock this week against Denver because we know Denver's going to put up their points. So look for Crabtree to be involved again. Bolden get his fair share, and hopefully Vernon Davis will look a little better. I think he will. I think you're going to start to see him get some of the rust off. He did show a little bit of that in the Rams game. Dropped a couple passes, just didn't look like he was in sync with Kaepernick. I do think that Vernon Davis and Kaepernick do get that going this week. As far as Denver, nothing need to point out with the passing game. We know Peyton, Demarius, Emmanuel Sanders, and Julius Thomas are obviously startable everywhere you have them. Welker hasn't been, really gotten to the game plan much yet. He may not be much moving forward as much. I mean, he'll obviously get his spots, but maybe not what he was at one time. The only noteworthy thing on that offense, though, is Ronnie Hillman getting the 24 carries for the 100 yards against a pretty good Jets run defense. I think he could start to eat into Monty Ball's playing time if he continues to run like that. I don't think that Ronnie Hillman can ever be an every down back just due to his size, and obviously he has fumble issues, but great change of pace, and I think that he and Monty Ball could maybe complement each other, and I think it hurts Monty Ball more than anything to see Hillman run like this because Ball has not looked good at all in his early going. And then he gets injured, and Hillman comes in and looks better. I worry about Ball's value, at least in the short term, coming off that injury.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, now Monday night game. Kurt, you want to finish this out with Houston at Pittsburgh?
Yeah, we'll start with the Texans here. Ryan Fitzpatrick still looks mediocre. I've touched on that in the past couple weeks. They just need somebody better back there with the weapons around. Arian Foster really looks like his old self the last couple weeks. You wonder how long that's going to last, but ride him while he's healthy and just keep going. Andre Johnson with a nice day, kind of something we've been looking for. We talked about him and DeAndre Hopkins, who you might not remember from last week, maybe a couple weeks ago, but he kind of disappeared last week and had 2 targets. I don't get that at all. But DeAndre Hopkins with 2 targets, big game for Andre Johnson. But versus Pittsburgh defense isn't the Pittsburgh defense that we've come to know in recent memory. So I expect both of those guys to have pretty good games this week. As far as the Steelers, Antonio Brown with a big game, which we kind of have come to expect, but everyone else pretty much average at best, really. Roethlisberger with an okay game, Le'Veon Bell with an okay game. Serviceable, didn't have bad games by any means, but you kind of hope for a little bit more out of definitely Le'Veon Bell and maybe Roethlisberger. That offense just needs to figure it out. I don't understand how you put up 10 points against the Browns. when you were down the whole game with the weapons they have a lot of potential. They just need to figure things out. And just a quick note, as far as that passing game, Wheaton actually got 12 targets this
Yeah.
game. He didn't really do anything with them, but 12 targets is a lot and something not to scoff at. So maybe just something to monitor going forward.
Yeah, and I just wanted to touch on. I did, I said last week that I thought Andre Johnson was going to outplay DeAndre Hopkins, but I don't think anybody really expected the two targets. I agree with you. I think he comes back and is a lot bigger part of the offense this week. But did you see at the end of the game that effort he gave on that fumble?
Yes, I I was saying it was exactly what I was thinking as soon as I watched it, and then as soon as I like refreshed my Twitter or Facebook, whatever I was on, it was like everybody was like, What is he doing?" And it's exactly what I was thinking. It was like he just didn't even try. I mean, he
I,
didn't try
I
at all.
actually didn't see it right away. Like I didn't. I was watching the game, and I saw the fumble, and I just didn't recognize him. But then I did the same thing. I jumped. I mean, Twitter these days you can't really watch games without it because it just makes it so much better. But I jumped on there, and everybody is just ranting and raving about it. So I had to go back and yeah, I just didn't didn't do. I mean, just didn't try. So.
I didn't
um,
get it.
Worth noting that bye week teams this week: Philadelphia Eagles, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Obviously, gonna be looking for some of those games, looking for some replacements for your Foles, McCoy, Ertz, Macklin. Obviously, those types of guys. Um, so certainly worth mentioning there. Let's round out the show with our best bets for week 7. Just to quickly recap our rules for quarterbacks and tight ends, just can't be in the top 12 in scoring so far. Also, staff rankings, at least consensus staff rankings, don't want to be ranked in the top 12. They cannot be 100% owned or 50% started. We are using ESPN for those stats, and then your wide receivers and running backs. It's going to be outside the top 24 for scoring, outside the top 24 for rankings, and then the 100% owned and the 50% started. We'll just quickly get through these. I've got my quarterback. I've got Derek Carr. We talked about through the 4 touchdowns last week against the Chargers. He pulls the 32nd ranked pass defense in the Arizona Cardinals. You wouldn't think it because of Patrick Peterson and Antonio Cromartie, but they've been able to throw on them better than you would think, and I think that they'll be throwing a lot that game. So I think Derek Carr could have a big game. Running back Roy Halou, he's just been involved. Very safe pick if you need a few points. He's good for double digits almost every week. I talked about before Brandon Cooks being involved in that Lions game. I think they're going to get the ball out quick and do a lot of underneath stuff. And then Kurt also mentioned, and I touched on the Jason Morrow pick in that game. If Decker is indeed taken out by Revis, I think that Amaro could have a decently big game tomorrow night. So those are my 4 best bets. Kurt, why don't you get through yours here? Quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end.
Yeah, so at quarterback, I really wish I could go with Carson Palmer again. Unfortunately, he came in at number 12 on the ESPN rankings, so I could not go with him. But I'll go with Brian Hoyer versus the Jags. I kind of touched on, this. I don't think he'll have a lot of attempts, but I think if he can score his points early, that he can put up a decent game. I'm going to stick with them in the same sense that it might be a blowout, and I'm going to go with my running back as Isaiah Crowell. And I think more so here, where they might be running out some clock later in the game, where they just run the ball a lot and don't want to wear out Ben Tate, and Crowell sees some carries similar to last week, basically. And at wide receiver, I'm going to go with my boy Kendall Wright. Uh, Last week, pretty ugly. I'm hoping Locker starts and he comes back to the Kendall Wright that we know. They play Washington, who's a pretty weak pass defense. Hopefully, see a lot of targets this week. And I also had tight end Jason Morrow, but I'll just mention another name here, Owen Daniels. Flacco's winging the ball around everywhere. I was really disappointed last week that he throws 5 touchdowns and all these yards, and Owen Daniels has like a semi-average game.
Yeah.
But I think this week in a shootout with Atlanta, I think he has a big week.
Awesome. Those are our week 7 best bets. If you're looking for guys for your bye weeks or have injuries, those are guys that maybe not owned or maybe on your bench. Certainly worth starting. That's all we've got here for week 7 podcast. Kurt, anything here to add?
No, another good week of football hopefully coming up
Absolutely. For Kurt, this is Josh. We'll see you next week.
later.